Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The courthouse parking lot was bustling that morning, but no one expected to see a gleaming black Rolls-Royce glide silently through the gates and pull into the front space reserved for dignitaries. Heads turned, eyes widened. It wasn't just the car, it was the woman who stepped out. Miriam, once the quiet and modest housewife everyone pitied, descended from the back seat with the grace of royalty. Her skin glowed, her outfit was flawlessly tailored, and her aura commanded silence. She held her chin high, as though nothing about today frightened her. Inside the courtroom, Chike sat beside Amanda, his young, flashy girlfriend, grinning with confidence. He believed this divorce was just a formality, another box to tick before finally erasing the woman he claimed was holding him back. But when the heavy courtroom doors swung open and Miriam walked in, his world stopped. Amanda's jaw dropped. Chike blinked like he'd seen a ghost. It wasn't just her appearance that shocked them, it was the power she exuded. The same woman who once begged him to eat her food and cried when he stayed out all night had just walked in like a queen among peasants. The judge cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as whispers fluttered through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. "All rise," the clerk announced, but everyone was already on edge. Chike stared in disbelief, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Amanda leaned toward him, her whisper sharp and anxious. "Is that your wife?" He nodded slowly, his mind racing. Just a few months ago, she had been wearing old wrappers at home, cooking for a man who never appreciated her. Just a few weeks ago, he had tossed her out of his life with smug satisfaction, convinced he was upgrading to a younger model. Now the downgrade had just stolen the show. Miriam took her seat beside her lawyer, her fingers calm, her face unreadable. She didn't look once in Chike's direction. Her indifference sliced deeper than any insult. The judge scanned the case file, unaware of the emotional earthquake unfolding between the parties. Chike's heart pounded, but his pride wouldn't let him speak. Amanda, sensing the shift in power, pulled her hand away from his. Her eyes betrayed a mixture of jealousy and fear. The same woman she once mocked was now commanding the room without a word. Miriam sat still, but her mind was a storm of memory. The day he first stopped eating her meals. The way he began rejecting her touch, dismissing her opinions, comparing her to other women without shame. She remembered the night she lay bleeding on the cold kitchen floor after he shoved her during an argument. The night she lost their only child. The child she had prayed for, fought for, and wept for in silence. And he never apologized. Not once. Instead, he blamed her for being too fragile, for always getting emotional, for being the reason things were hard. He humiliated her in front of Amanda. He told people she was cursed. But she stayed quiet. She stayed loving. Until she didn't. Now she sat there, powerful, transformed, and free. Today was not just about divorce. It was a funeral. She was burying the last trace of the woman who once begged for his affection. Miriam looked straight ahead, not at him. She didn't need to. He was already breaking. For the first time in his arrogant life, Chike was speechless. Chike had once been a dreamer, a man who started from humble beginnings with Miriam beside him every step of the way. In their early days, they were inseparable, sharing dreams, meals of soap-gary, and midnight prayers. Miriam was the type of woman who poured her soul into a man without expecting anything in return. She didn't care that they lived in a single-room apartment or that Chike borrowed clothes to attend interviews. She stood beside him when he lost jobs, when his friends mocked him, and when the landlord threatened eviction. When he finally started making money through a tech contract and began rubbing shoulders with the elite, it was still Miriam who cooked, ironed his suits, massaged his swollen feet, and prayed for his success. But as the wealth grew, so did Chike's pride. He started acting as though his growth had nothing to do with her. He saw himself as self-made and began to believe that Miriam's simplicity was now beneath him. The same man who once called her his crown now treated her like an inconvenience, like a worn-out cloth he needed to discard. Chike's transformation was both sudden and devastating. He no longer smiled when he came home. He stopped asking her how her day went. He started returning late with the scent of expensive perfumes on his shirt, perfumes Miriam never wore. She noticed the messages on his phone, the fake names saved with hearts, the showering of gifts he never brought her. When she tried to ask, he would respond with indifference or anger. "I don't need this stress," he once barked at her. "You don't motivate me anymore." It shattered Miriam. She remembered staring into the mirror after he left that night, wondering if her love had become invisible. She began to doubt her worth, feeling small in a house she built with him. She still cooked his meals, ironed his clothes, and waited at the door for him to come home. But he never noticed. He never cared. Her once vibrant laughter had become a quiet ache. But even then, she stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she still believed in the man she married. She thought, foolishly, that he was just going through a phase. She thought love would bring him back. But Chaik wasn't lost. He had simply moved on emotionally without informing her. The gap between them widened. He talked to Amanda on the phone while Miriam served him food. He no longer touched her, no longer asked if she had eaten. Instead, he criticized her cooking, her clothes, her silence. The same man who once danced with her in the rain now rolled his eyes when she tried to kiss his cheek. He told her she was holding him back from reaching his full potential. And she believed him. She began to overcompensate, learning new recipes, trying to dress more attractively, even taking online business classes just to seem more interesting. But nothing worked. His pride had rewritten the story. In his mind, Miriam was no longer his partner. She was his burden. And that realization, like poison, seeped into every part of their marriage, slowly turning their love into a battlefield she was fighting alone. The silence in their home was no longer peaceful. It was a heavy, choking presence. Miriam had come to dread evenings, not because she was lonely, but because she would once again be reminded of just how invisible she had become in her own marriage. Chaik would return home, sometimes after midnight, other times not at all, and when he did, he barely acknowledged her presence. The living room that once echoed with shared laughter and music now harbored only the sound of Chaik's phone buzzing with messages and laughter that wasn't hers. Miriam would sit on the edge of their bed, listening to him shower, while her untouched food turned cold on the dining table. She never cried where he could see, but the pillows bore the weight of her muffled sobs. She missed him, not the man he had become, but the man he used to be. And worse, she missed herself. The woman who once laughed freely, the woman who once danced in the kitchen while cooking a gussie, the woman who believed in forever. Chaik's disdain deepened with time. It wasn't enough that he ignored her. He began insulting her efforts. One morning, she ironed his shirt and left a handwritten note tucked into his briefcase, reminding him to smile and that she was proud of him. He threw the note on the table that night and said, "I'm not a child. Keep your unnecessary drama to yourself." Miriam felt like someone had poured ice down her spine. Even their small routines became weapons. When she greeted him in the morning, he would nod without looking. When she told him she missed him, he scoffed and replied, "Do something about your life. I can't carry you." That was the first time she truly looked at him and wondered who this man was. The love she gave him now lived in the graveyard of their marriage, buried by his pride and ego. But she still didn't leave. Love, real love, makes fools out of women like her. Women who give until there is nothing left. Despite it all, Miriam never raised her voice. Even when Chaik walked in one Sunday with lipstick on his collar and Amanda's perfume clouding the air around him, she simply walked to their bedroom and closed the door. She screamed into a pillow that night, a scream no one would ever hear. She wrote in her journal instead, pages and pages of prayers, pain and confusion. She still hoped he would return to his senses. But the truth was, Chaik didn't care. Not anymore. Amanda had poisoned his mind, convincing him that Miriam was too ordinary for a man with his ambition. She told him he needed a woman who could match his energy and help him network, flirt, and climb faster. And Chaik believed her. Miriam, the woman who bathed his sick body when he had typhoid, who borrowed money to pay their rent, who sold her gold to fund his first business pitch, was now nothing more than an obstacle in his eyes. And that silence between them? It was louder than any fight. It all came to a head the night Chike finally allowed his simmering hatred to boil over. He had come home late, the stench of alcohol and Amanda's perfume clinging to his shirt like shame. Miriam had waited up, just like always, her tired eyes and soft voice barely holding back tears. She asked a simple question. "Chike, why are you doing this to me?" That was it. That was the moment. Instead of replying, he erupted, flipping over the center table, shattering glass, and screaming accusations she had never imagined. "You're a leech. A parasite. You're the reason everything is going wrong in my life," he yelled. "I don't feel like a man with you." His words cut deeper than any blade. Miriam stood frozen, her heart shattering into pieces as the man she once adored called her useless, lazy, and a curse. Then, in the middle of his tirade, he shoved her. She lost her footing, slammed against the tiled floor, and everything went black. She woke up in the hospital to the soft beeping of machines and the sterile smell of pain. The doctor informed her she had lost the baby. Their baby. The one she had prayed for after 2 miscarriages. The one she already named in her heart. And he wasn't even there. Chike didn't show up at the hospital. Not once. Amanda did. She stood at the hospital entrance days later, smirking, holding Chike's wallet, and saying coldly, "You should have left when you had the chance. Maybe your baby would still be alive." Nurses had to restrain Miriam from collapsing all over again. That moment changed something in her. Something in her soul cracked permanently. The love she once clung to now tasted like ash in her mouth. The man she married had murdered her spirit and their child with his carelessness. But even in that pain, Miriam didn't scream. She didn't fight. She healed silently. But something within her had shifted forever. When Chike finally returned to the house a week later, he found Miriam sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at a photograph of their last anniversary. She didn't speak. He didn't either. He picked up a change of clothes and left without asking how she was or what the doctor said. No apologies. No acknowledgement. Just silence. And it was in that silence that Miriam made a vow not to get revenge, but to never be weak again. She would not allow the man who took everything from her to see her broken. From that night onward, she began applying for jobs, updating her CV, studying silently, and praying in private. Chike never noticed. He was too busy showing Amanda off to the world. But something was happening inside the woman he thought he destroyed. And soon, the world would know it too. Amanda was not just a mistress. She was a mirror reflecting everything Chike thought he deserved. Younger, Kavya, unapologetically bold. She was the complete opposite of Miriam in every way. She didn't speak softly or carry burdens for a man. She expected to be pampered. Amanda made Chike feel like a king again, something he believed Miriam had failed at. She flattered his ego, praised his business ideas, even when they were flawed, and played the part of the perfect side piece. Never nagging, always seductive. But behind her glittering smile was a calculated woman who had no intention of being a temporary affair. Amanda wanted more. She had tasted the comfort of Chike's money and attention, and she wanted to cement her place by replacing Miriam entirely. What made her even more dangerous was her manipulation. She never directly asked Chike to leave Miriam. Instead, she planted seeds of dissatisfaction, saying things like, "You deserve someone who supports your dreams," or "Maybe the problem is the energy around you." At first, Chike dismissed those comments as harmless flirtation. But the more time he spent with Amanda, the more convinced he became that Miriam was the source of his limitations. When a deal fell through, or when his clients pulled out of negotiations, he never looked inward. He looked at Miriam. "Since I married her, things haven't been smooth," he told himself. Amanda agreed. "Your wife lacks ambition. Maybe that's affecting your blessings," she whispered into his ears, caressing his neck in bed. It was foolish, but Chike believed it. He started to rewrite the history of their relationship in his mind, turning Miriam from a devoted wife into a chain around his ankle. Amanda encouraged him to be more ruthless, to take risks, and to enjoy his life without guilt. "She had her time," she said one night, sipping wine beside him. Now it's our turn." Chike laughed and nodded, slowly erasing every memory of the woman who once fed him with borrowed money. Worse still, Amanda began inserting herself into his world. She showed up at his office, met some of his clients, and even made herself known to a few of his friends. When they asked about Miriam, Chike would scoff. "We're on different pages," he'd say. "She's not really in the picture anymore." Amanda started redecorating his new apartment, suggesting he change his wardrobe, his cologne, his routines. She was transforming him to match her idea of a high-value man. And Chike, blinded by lust and pride, surrendered. He didn't notice that Amanda had no roots, no substance, and no intention of building something real. She was there for the glory, not the grind. But to Chike, none of that mattered. All he could see was that Amanda gave him what Miriam no longer did: validation. It didn't cross his mind that what he now worshipped was an illusion. And illusions always fade, especially when tested by time and truth. Amanda's influence over Chike grew more aggressive and deliberate. She now monitored his time, whispered toxic ideas about Miriam daily, and fed off his growing frustration with his boring home life. When she spoke, it was always laced with venom wrapped in sugar. "I don't know how you managed to live in that dead house," she'd pout. "You deserve champagne energy, not rainwater vibes." Chike would chuckle, but the words lingered in his mind. He began looking at Miriam as a mistake, a hindrance, a chain. When he saw her praying or reading, he rolled his eyes. "Wasting time again," he'd mutter. Even when she tried to touch him, to remind him they once had something sacred, he pulled away like she was diseased. He stopped wearing his wedding ring, began posting Amanda subtly on his status, and started introducing her to people as someone special. Miriam saw the signs, but she said nothing. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. She knew any confrontation would be turned against her. And deep down, she still held onto the hope that the man she loved might return. But Chike was gone, devoured by the flattery and excitement Amanda offered. He would return home late, leave early, and make sure to ignore anything Miriam did right. Even when she cleaned the house or prepared his favorite meals, he made sarcastic remarks or criticized them. "Is this supposed to be stew? You need to learn from real women," he once sneered, tossing his plate aside. Miriam excused herself and cried quietly in the bathroom, her back pressed against the door, wondering when love turned into warfare. Amanda, sensing her victory drawing near, began mocking Miriam openly. She once sent flowers to Chike at home with a note that read, "For my king, let the queen rest." When Miriam saw the note, she smiled bitterly and placed it in her journal. She didn't respond, didn't fight. She simply noted it, adding it to the growing archive of disrespect and humiliation she endured in silence. Then came the moment that broke everything. A business deal Chike had been anticipating for months fell through. Furious, he came home drunk and started blaming Miriam for his bad luck. "Ever since you entered my life, nothing has gone right," he shouted, pacing like a madman. "You are cursed. Your energy is killing me." Miriam stood still, her hands trembling. She wanted to scream, to break things, to slap sense into him. But instead she asked softly, "What happened to us, Chike?" That was when he shoved her. Hard. Her head hit the corner of the dining table, and she collapsed. Blood pooled quickly beneath her. In his drunken haze, he froze. But instead of helping, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. That night, she lost the child they had prayed for through years of heartbreak. And in the days that followed, Chike never once asked if she was okay. Amanda later told friends that the child wasn't meant to be anyway. It was then Miriam realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was destruction. The hospital room was dim, sterile, and far too quiet. Miriam stared at the four in her arm and the empty space where her belly used to swell with hope. Her baby, her miracle, was gone. The doctor told her gently, "We tried everything." The fall was too much. She nodded silently, tears sliding down her cheeks without resistance. The physical pain was excruciating, but the emotional void was unbearable. That child had been her last prayer, the final tie she thought could bring Chike back. But even the universe seemed to side with his cruelty. She lay in bed for 2 nights, watching the clock tick, waiting for a husband who never came. It wasn't until her friend Uju arrived that she learned Chaik hadn't even called the hospital to check on her. Uju looked furious. Her arms folded tightly as she said, "He's posting pictures with that girl Miriam. He didn't even cancel his weekend getaway." Miriam turned her face to the wall. She wasn't shocked, just hollow. When she was discharged, no one came to pick her up. Uju brought her home, and Miriam walked into a house that now felt like a coffin. The walls, once filled with memories, now screamed betrayal. She touched the baby's crib, still wrapped in blue ribbons, and finally collapsed to the floor. For hours, she wept like a woman possessed, grief, rage, and humiliation tearing through her. But eventually, her tears dried. Something shifted inside her that day. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want explanations. She wanted transformation. She realized that the greatest payback wasn't destruction. It was elevation. From that day forward, she began to rise, not loudly, but deliberately. She updated her CV. She signed up for webinars. She spent hours studying at night, while Chaik was out flaunting his new love. She no longer tried to please him. She stopped asking questions. She stopped hoping. Instead, she started planning. And Chaik? He noticed nothing. His arrogance convinced him she had accepted defeat. He continued spending nights with Amanda, laughing at Miriam's expense. They mocked her dead energy, her barren womb, her village behavior. He told his friends he was finally preparing for divorce, so he could marry someone classy and smart. Amanda pushed harder. "Get rid of her. She's dragging you down," she said one night, lounging in silk sheets. Chaik agreed. And that's when he filed for divorce. When the papers arrived, Miriam didn't cry. She simply signed. But deep in her heart, she whispered, "Not yet. You will see me again. Not in pain, not in tears, but in power. And when that day comes, I won't need to say a single word." The days that followed the divorce papers were both numbing and oddly clarifying. Miriam sat at the window each morning with a cup of tea she barely sipped, watching the sun rise like it was mocking her for surviving the night. Her body was still healing from a fall, but her heart bore deeper wounds, ones that couldn't be stitched or bandaged. She walked past the baby crib every day, no longer crying, just silent. Grief had become her roommate. It followed her into the shower, sat beside her while she made toast she wouldn't eat, and lay with her when she tried and failed to sleep. She could still feel the baby moving inside her, phantom kicks that made her curl up and sob when no one was watching. It wasn't just the child she mourned, it was everything. Her marriage, her peace, her innocence. She had been faithful to a man who turned her womb into a battleground, and then called her the enemy. Despite the agony, Miriam forced herself into motion. She stopped trying to engage Chaik in conversation. When he came home, she remained neutral. No smiles, no questions, just calm detachment. That alone irritated him more than tears ever could. He was used to her chasing, pleading, begging for scraps of affection. But now she was quiet, and something about her silence made him restless. One night, she overheard him tell Amanda on the phone, "She's dead inside. Just wasting space. The earlier I kick her out, the better." It was the first time she smiled in weeks, not because it was funny, but because she realized he no longer had the power to break her. His words were venom. Yes, but she was now immune. That smile marked the beginning of her rebirth. She didn't want to exist just to prove him wrong. She wanted to exist because she had so much more to offer the world than a broken version of herself molded by a man who never deserved her. So she created a plan. Late at night, after cleaning her wounds and whispering goodbye to her unborn child, she began working on her CV. She stayed up researching companies, opportunities, fellowships, anything to claw her way out of the grave she'd been emotionally buried in. She rewrote her bio a dozen times. She practiced speaking in front of the mirror until her voice no longer shook. She took online courses on business strategy, corporate management, and digital branding, subjects Chaik once mocked her for. Her only friends now were YouTube tutorials and the occasional text from Uju. But that was enough. She wasn't trying to prove anything to Chike anymore. She was trying to rediscover herself. Slowly, painfully, Miriam began to rise, like a flower cracking through concrete. She no longer waited for anyone to rescue her. She was learning to save herself. The envelope was thick, sealed in a brown manila folder, and stamped with Chike's signature boldness. It didn't just contain divorce papers. It contained an insult, a final slap in the face. Miriam sat at the dining table, the same table she had once set lovingly for their anniversary dinner, and stared at her name printed on legal documents, as though she were a stranger in her own life. She opened the folder with steady hands. Inside was a letter from Chike's lawyer, stating coldly that he was seeking dissolution of the marriage due to irreconcilable differences, emotional incompatibility, and lack of ambition from his wife. There was no mention of her miscarriages, no mention of her sacrifices, no acknowledgement of the years she spent building him up. Just legal jargon and lies. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. She read the document again, this time slower. Then she stood up, walked to the kitchen, and calmly made herself a cup of tea. The old Miriam might have broken down. This version of Miriam only tightened her robe and whispered, "Thank you." Amanda's fingerprints were all over that letter. The phrasing, the tone, the sheer audacity, it reeked of her. Chike had become so intoxicated with his new life that he couldn't even draft a decent excuse. Miriam laughed, soft, bitter, almost amused. For years, she had feared this day. She once believed that losing Chike would destroy her. But now that it was here, it felt like liberation. She signed the papers that night and sealed them back without hesitation. No long notes. No letters. Just her name written boldly at the bottom, as if to say, "I choose to walk away from your hell." When she handed them back to the courier the next morning, he looked surprised. "No message for your husband?" he asked. Miriam smiled faintly. "No," she said. "He'll get his message in due time." And with that, she closed the door and her past. She doubled her efforts after that. She applied for 20 jobs that week, customized her proposals, and updated her LinkedIn. She reached out to former classmates and even a few ex-colleagues who still admired her work ethic. One night, while browsing job listings at 2 a.m., she stumbled on a role for a business development strategist at a multinational company teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. They needed someone bold, someone different. Her heartbeat quickened as she read the criteria. It was a long shot, but so was everything she'd done lately. She submitted her application with a customized proposal on how she'd turn their sinking ship around. Then she shut her laptop, laid back on her bed, and for the first time in a long while whispered, "I am not done yet." That whisper would soon echo across boardrooms she hadn't even entered yet. Miriam didn't expect a reply so soon. Just 3 days after sending in her application, her phone buzzed with an email notification. Subject, interview invitation. Her hands shook as she clicked it open. They wanted to see her the next morning. No long process. No screening stage. Just an immediate sit-down with the board. It was a high-stakes company, an investment firm with government backing, and the CEO was desperate to stop the hemorrhaging. Miriam reread the mail 10 times before finally screaming into her pillow with joy. She leapt from the bed and called Uju, who screamed louder than she did. But after the euphoria passed, anxiety crept in. "What if they laugh at me? What if they see through me?" she asked. Uju didn't even let her finish. "Miriam, this world doesn't need another pretty face with connections. It needs a woman with fire. You've survived hell. Walk in there like you own the damn building." That night, Miriam pressed her old gown and prepared slides that would make or break her future. The next morning, she arrived early, too early. She sat in the lobby, rehearsing her pitch until her throat was dry. When the receptionist called her in, she stood up tall and walked with confidence she wasn't sure she had. The boardroom was filled with 7 men and 1 woman, all of them middle-aged, tired, and unimpressed. They barely looked up from their files when she entered. "You have 10 minutes, the chairman said coldly. Miriam nodded and opened her laptop. She didn't start with greetings or small talk. She started with numbers, raw, painful numbers that exposed their losses. Then she showed them patterns in their marketing strategy that were bleeding money. She didn't stop there. She laid out a fresh 3-month turnaround plan, identified weak departments, and even exposed a duplication loophole that could have been costing them millions. She spoke fast but clearly, passionately but firmly. When her 10 minutes ended, the room was dead silent. The chairman leaned forward slowly, stared at her, then looked at the other members. "You found all this from public records and staff comments?" Miriam nodded. "In 4 days," she replied. The woman at the end of the table chuckled. "Either you're crazy or you're brilliant." Miriam stood still. "I've been called both," she said. They asked her to wait outside. 15 minutes later, they called her back in, not to ask more questions, but to offer her a 3-month contract. "Fix this mess," the chairman said, "and we'll make it permanent." Miriam held back tears, smiled, and replied, "I plan to." As she walked out of the building, the receptionist gave her a knowing smile. Miriam didn't just get a job that day. She got a weapon, and she was going to wield it not to hurt, but to rise. In silence, in strength, and in style. The first week on the job was nothing short of war. Miriam stepped into a company on life support. Departments were disorganized, staff morale was dangerously low, and the leadership team was defensive and condescending. Her presence was met with skepticism, especially from male executives who thought she was just a pity hire. They whispered behind her back, laughed at her soft voice, and ignored her emails. But Miriam wasn't new to being underestimated. She had lived under the roof of a man who called her worthless, endured silent dinners where her voice carried no weight, and survived years of emotional torment without losing her mind. These men didn't scare her. They didn't know that a woman who has buried a child can no longer be broken. She spent her nights at the office studying spreadsheets, auditing departments, and sitting quietly in staff meetings, watching people expose their incompetence with every word they spoke. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. She let them laugh. But when she finally spoke, she gave them data, structure, and solutions that slapped the arrogance out of their mouths. By the end of the second week, her presence could no longer be ignored. She closed 2 deals, restructured an entire failing department, and identified 3 ghost vendors bleeding money from the company. When the CEO called an emergency meeting, the room was tense. But instead of blaming the staff like he usually did, he introduced Miriam as the firm's new strategic lead and made it clear that all department heads would now report to her. The shock was deafening. One man walked out. Another slammed his pen. But she didn't blink. She had earned her seat, not with charm or connections, but with results. Outside the boardroom, staff began whispering her name with admiration. Some were inspired. Others were threatened. Miriam didn't care. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there to rebuild a legacy. At night, she'd go home exhausted. But for the first time in years, she'd smile. She had found something Chike could never give her: purpose. Still, she kept everything quiet. No one in her neighborhood knew she had landed such a powerful role. She still wore simple clothes and took taxis to work. When Uju asked her why, she replied, "Because I'm not done yet." She hadn't forgotten the humiliation, the betrayal, the child she lost on the cold kitchen floor while Chike partied with Amanda. She wasn't healing out of spite, but neither was she ready to forgive. Every new success was a reminder that she was more than a discarded wife. She was becoming the woman she was always meant to be. And she would let the world know, not with noise, but with undeniable transformation. Every night, she'd look into the mirror and whisper to herself, "One day, you'll walk past him, and he won't recognize the woman he buried." That day was coming, and she would arrive not with anger, but in elegance. The 3rd month brought victory after victory. The company that was once hemorrhaging money now began to breathe again. Sales increased, expenses were slashed, and investors who had once backed out were now scheduling meetings. The CEO offered Miriam a permanent role with shares and full control of strategy across the West African branch. It was more than a job, it was a crown. But Miriam remained humble. She hired more women, mentored interns, and turned her office into a sanctuary for growth and excellence. Her name began circulating in business circles, though few could place a face to it. She didn't do interviews. She didn't pose for magazine covers. Her power was quiet, clean, and deliberate. She changed her wardrobe, not to please anyone, but because she had finally outgrown her past. Custom-tailored suits replaced tired wrappers, heels replaced slippers, and elegance replaced the exhaustion she once wore like skin. One evening, she stood before her full-length mirror at home, dressed in a sleek navy suit, her hair pinned in a regal updo. She hardly recognized the woman staring back. This Miriam had backbone, poise, and power. She no longer walked with her head down. Her eyes no longer searched for validation. She no longer flinched when her phone rang. She was free. And yet, as she turned away from the mirror, her gaze fell upon the framed photo on her dresser, a sonogram, her baby's first and only picture. A single tear slid down her cheek. No amount of success could erase that pain. No job, no title, no applause could bring that child back. And it was in that sobering truth that she made a vow. She would never allow herself to be reduced again. Not by a man, not by a lie, not by fear. She was becoming Miriam again, not the wife, not the shadow, but the woman with vision and voice. Though she stayed out of Chike's radar, news of her transformation slowly began to trickle down through whispers. A former colleague mentioned her name at a business conference Chike attended, speaking about the brilliant strategist who saved an entire firm from collapse. Chike laughed it off at first, until he saw a blurry photo and recognized the eyes. "That's not possible," he muttered. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Amanda noticed the shift in his mood. He grew restless, snappy, and distracted. "You still think about her?" she asked one night. He didn't answer, because deep down he knew he had discarded gold for glitter. And somewhere, somehow, he sensed that Miriam's silence wasn't weakness. It was power loading. And soon it would strike. Amanda had begun to lose her grip. Chike no longer looked at her the same way. The thrill had faded. Her suggestions annoyed him. Her demands irritated him. And worst of all, she noticed how often he stared into space, lost in thought. When she asked what was wrong, he dismissed her. But she knew. He was thinking about Miriam, the woman they both mocked, the woman they had written off. Amanda doubled her efforts, planned exotic weekend getaways, bought him expensive watches, even suggested he change his car. But Chike was no longer dazzled. The fire was gone, and Amanda, sensing it, began to panic. She knew that if Chike ever truly realized what he had lost, she would be discarded next. So she did what all manipulators do when cornered. She went for the final blow. "You need to finalize the divorce," she said one morning over breakfast. "It's time to cut ties completely. She's the reason your business isn't growing. Her spirit is still attached to you." Chike nodded slowly. He was too embarrassed to admit that he had already heard whispers about Miriam's success. A part of him still clung to denial. "It's probably a coincidence," he told himself. "Just a lucky break." But Amanda was insistent. She pushed the divorce hearing date, paid for the legal fees, and even prepared their engagement announcement draft. "Once she's out of the way, everything will fall into place," she promised. Chike wanted to believe it, but something inside him was beginning to fracture. He had dreams now, vivid dreams where he saw Miriam walking past him in a glowing white dress, her face calm, her eyes distant. And in every dream, she never looked back. He'd wake up breathless, sweating, and unsure why he felt like a man drowning in his own choices. Amanda noticed. She tried to reignite their flame, but it was already fading. Not because of what Miriam had done, but because of what she hadn't. She hadn't begged. She hadn't fought. She had simply vanished and become unforgettable. The divorce date was finalized. Amanda bought a new dress for the hearing and told Chike to prepare to walk into his freedom. He smiled on the outside, but inside, fear clawed at him. What if she showed up looking weak and broken? What if she cried? Would he feel guilt? Or worse, what if she didn't come at all? What if she had truly moved on? The uncertainty tormented him. Amanda mistook his silence for agreement. "By this time next week, she'll be history," she said. Chike nodded, unaware that history was about to walk back into his life, not as a ghost, but as a revolution. And this time, she would not come carrying bags. She would come driving a Rolls-Royce, wearing strength as perfume and closure as her crown. The courtroom was unusually full that morning. Most divorce hearings passed quietly, but something about this case drew whispers and attention. Maybe it was TOCHI's boldness. Maybe it was Amanda's arrogance. Or maybe it was the calm before the storm. TOCHI arrived early, dressed in a tailored ash-colored suit and flashing a gold wristwatch Amanda had gifted him. He wore confidence like a second skin. Beside him, Amanda walked in like she owned the world, clad in a tight-fitting red dress and high heels that clicked across the polished floor like warning shots. They both sat on the left side of the courtroom, whispering and giggling as though they were about to win a trophy. "Let's get this over with," Amanda muttered. "She'll probably come in crying or with her lawyer stammering through excuses." TOCHI nodded, amused. He hadn't heard from Miriam since the papers were signed. He assumed she was either broken or had moved back to her parents. What neither of them expected was the sound of a purring engine, followed by a collective gasp from the corridor. Outside, the unmistakable silhouette of a black Rolls-Royce Ghost had just glided into the courthouse lot. 2 security officers held the doors as the back seat opened slowly, and out stepped a woman they hadn't seen in months, yet now looked like she had stepped off the cover of Forbes Africa. Miriam descended in a custom cream-colored pantsuit that hugged her figure like it had been sewn by royalty. Her posture was regal, her afro sleekly styled, and her expression unreadable. She didn't look right. She didn't look left. She just walked, each step deliberate, her heels echoing down the hallway like a countdown to reckoning. The journalists who had been tipped off scrambled to get a photo, but she offered none. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone was thunder. Amanda, peering through the courtroom blinds, choked on her breath. "TOCHI," she whispered. Is that Miriam?" TOCHI stood frozen, staring through the glass, as the woman he had humiliated, abandoned, and discarded walked into the courtroom with poise no mistress could mimic. As Miriam entered, all the heads turned. Even the judge paused to look up. She walked past TOCHI and Amanda without a glance, taking her seat beside a confident, well-dressed lawyer who immediately whispered updates to her. TOCHI felt something he hadn't felt in years: nakedness. Not physical, but emotional. He suddenly became aware of his flaws, his mistakes, and how horribly he had miscalculated. Amanda reached for his hand, but he withdrew it subtly. Miriam's lawyer stood and began speaking, not just about the divorce, but about Miriam's accomplishments since leaving the marriage. He presented documentation proving she had been instrumental in saving a multimillion naira company from bankruptcy, earning shares and a regional director position. The judge, impressed, raised an eyebrow. Amanda sat stiffly, her confidence draining by the second. But Miriam said nothing. She simply crossed her legs, folded her hands, and watched. Not with revenge in her eyes, but with something even more frightening: indifference. And that silence thundered louder than any insult she could have hurled. TOCHI couldn't stop staring at her. The same woman he once accused of dragging him down was now commanding the room, without uttering a single word. Her poise shook him. The once fragile wife who used to beg him to come home early was now untouchable. He remembered her pleading with him to eat her food. He remembered rolling his eyes as she wept on their anniversary. He remembered saying, "You're the reason I'm stagnant," while Amanda massaged his shoulders in their hotel room. Every memory now burned like acid in his chest. And what hurt the most was that she didn't even look at him. Not once. Not even when their names were called together. She responded to every prompt with grace. Her voice, when she did speak, was calm and layered with elegance. TOCHI squirmed in his seat, sweat forming under his collar. His mind began to race backward, searching for where it all went wrong. And the horrifying answer came. It went wrong the moment I stopped valuing her. Amanda was panicking. She whispered things in his ear, urging him to defend himself, to object, to speak up. But TOCHI was mute. Nothing he could say would change what the judge had just heard. In fact, the judge looked at him with disdain. You filed for divorce, yet your wife seems to have grown immensely since separation. Meanwhile, your own records show decline, the judge remarked. The statement hit like a slap. The lawyer representing Miriam didn't ask for spousal support, alimony, or assets. She didn't need them. My client does not wish to share in anything belonging to Mr. Chaik, the lawyer said, because she has already surpassed what was lost. That sentence shattered Chaik's remaining dignity. He couldn't look at her anymore. His legs felt heavy, his throat dry. He wished, in that moment, that she would shout, that she would scream, curse, cry, anything to give him hope that she still cared. But Miriam remained composed. And that stillness was his death sentence. After the judge finalized the dissolution, Chaik stood as she walked past. For the first time in months, their eyes met. He wanted to say something, anything, but his lips betrayed him. Miriam stared into his eyes for a brief, cold second before turning away, without a word. That moment broke him. Amanda reached for his arm again. This time, he snatched it away. "Don't touch me," he whispered, angered not at her, but at himself. He rushed outside, hoping to catch Miriam before she drove off. But the Rolls-Royce was already pulling away, her silhouette framed in the back seat, like a queen leaving behind peasants. He stood there, confused, broken, and completely humiliated. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a funeral for everything he once was. And this time, there would be no resurrection. He had lost not just a wife, but a destiny. Chaik returned home that night and walked into silence. Amanda tried to cheer him up, but her voice grated on him. "You're better off," she said. "She was never good for you." But the words meant nothing now. He saw Miriam in everything. The way she used to light the scented candles in the sitting room, the folded towels she arranged every weekend, the way she used to iron his shirts with love. He walked into the kitchen and found Amanda had ordered fast food. Miriam used to cook his favorite dishes from scratch, even when he insulted her. The house, which once seemed exciting with Amanda's presence, now felt cheap, cluttered, empty. That night he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, the sound of the courtroom echoing in his ears. "She has already surpassed what was lost." Those words looped like a cruel lullaby. He realized he didn't just lose her. He had pushed away the only person who truly believed in him, and in doing so, lost himself. In the days that followed, Amanda's mask began to crack. She grew irritable, demanding more money and time. She wanted vacations, jewelry, a new apartment. She had tasted the power Miriam once withheld and now wanted it doubled. Chaik, distracted and heartbroken, couldn't meet her expectations. His business began to decline. Clients pulled out. Investors no longer trusted his judgment. Word of Miriam's rise reached the corporate network, and people who once admired him now laughed behind his back. "He let her go," one client remarked. "A fool." Amanda accused him of sabotaging their future and stormed out one night after a heated argument. She didn't return. When Chaik called her, she had blocked his number. His house felt colder than ever. The man who once felt like a king now shuffled through life like a beggar in his own palace. And every mirror he passed reflected the same truth. He had ruined everything. One evening, Chaik gathered the courage to drive past Miriam's office. He parked across the street, watching as she exited the building in another elegant outfit, her staff standing respectfully as she gave final instructions. She looked happy, free, glowing. A chauffeur opened her car door. She paused, looked around briefly, then entered the car and disappeared into the evening traffic. Chaik sat in his car, numb. Tears welled in his eyes, but refused to fall. He had chased beauty only to lose substance. He had mistaken silence for weakness and loyalty for foolishness. Now all he had left were memories, and a name he no longer had the right to call. Miriam. And this time, she wasn't coming back. Chaik's world collapsed in slow motion. Days turned into weeks, and each one brought a new layer of emptiness. Amanda never returned, not even to collect her clothes. She had moved on, just like she once urged him to. His clients dwindled, the business contracts dried up, and his office now echoed with the whispers of regret. Those who once praised him began avoiding his calls. His staff looked to him with eyes that mirrored doubt. He sat in boardrooms unsure of his own words, wondering how things unraveled so quickly. But deep down he knew the truth. It started the day he stopped watering the garden that grew his life. The day he abandoned Miriam, the one person who genuinely believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. Now he was a king with a crumbling kingdom and no queen to rebuild it. He began replaying memories like old, haunting music. Miriam's laughter in the kitchen, the way she placed a warm towel on his forehead when he had malaria, how she'd stay up till midnight sewing a tear in his favorite shirt. He remembered mocking those same gestures, telling her to grow up and get a life. Now he would give anything to hear her voice again, to have her back for one evening, even if just to say sorry. But apologies no longer held currency. Not after everything he had done. He visited her parents once, hoping to explain, but they turned him away before he could even open his mouth. "She doesn't live here anymore," her father said, voice stern and full of judgment. "And even if she did, you wouldn't be welcome." Chike nodded in shame, dragging his feet back to his car. He was a man learning too late that real value cannot be replaced by fantasy. One rainy night, Chike sat alone in the living room, staring at a framed photo from their wedding. Miriam was in her white gown, smiling up at him with a love so pure it almost hurt to remember. He whispered to the photo, "I'm sorry." But there was no response, only the ticking of a wall clock counting down the time he'd already wasted. He tried calling her. The line never connected. He wrote messages he never sent. He drafted emails and deleted them before clicking send. He wanted to beg, to scream, to collapse at her feet if that's what it would take. But he also knew he had given her every reason not to look back. The weight of regret crushed him every day. He had once stood at the top, wealthy, adored, and powerful. But none of it mattered now. He had traded a diamond for a pebble. And now, even the pebble was gone. In a desperate attempt to find closure, or perhaps to seek redemption, Chike began writing letters. He filled notebooks with apologies, confessions, and memories he couldn't say out loud. He addressed each one to Miriam, though he never mailed them. In the letters, he spoke of his fears, his insecurities, and the deep-rooted shame he carried for what he had done. He admitted how he allowed Amanda to poison his mind, how he had believed lies over loyalty, and how he took Miriam's silence for weakness. In one letter, he wrote, "You were my miracle, and I walked away from you like a fool." His handwriting grew shaky with each page, especially when he wrote about the child they lost. "I saw you lying there bleeding, and I walked out. God will judge me for that." He folded the pages carefully and placed them in a box he kept beneath his bed. It was the only place he now stored what little remained of his heart. One day, he gathered the courage to visit her office. Dressed in his best suit, carrying flowers and trembling hope, he arrived unannounced. Her receptionist gave him a cold but professional smile. "Sir, do you have an appointment?" He shook his head. "Tell her it's Chike. She'll understand." The woman raised an eyebrow, picked up the phone, and whispered something. After a long pause, she looked up and said, "She's not available to see you. And she asked me to let you know that you should stop coming." Chike felt like the ground beneath him gave way. He stood frozen for a moment, then quietly placed the flowers on the receptionist's desk and walked out. The sun outside was blinding, yet everything around him looked gray. His footsteps echoed as he left the building, not as a man visiting his past, but as a ghost returning to his own grave. Back home, he opened his notebook again, tears dripping onto the page. "She doesn't even want to see me," he wrote. "I don't blame her. I'm not the man I once was. I'm not even half." Then he turned the page and addressed a new letter, not to Miriam, but to the child they never got to meet. "I don't know if you would have been a boy or girl. I had names ready either way. I was going to build you a playground. Now I walk through this house, and all I hear is silence where your laughter should have been." That letter was the one that broke him. For the first time since she left, Chike wept like a child, not out of pity, but from the overwhelming realization that he had destroyed the only people who truly loved him. And no amount of regret would ever rebuild what he tore apart with his own hands. Miriam stood by her balcony one quiet evening, overlooking the city skyline that once seemed so far out of reach. A glass of wine in her hand, the wind in her hair, she looked every inch the woman she had fought to become. Behind her, her apartment was filled with evidence of her new life: awards, fresh flowers, journals, and books. And yet, on a side table near the window, sat a single black and white photograph, the sonogram, her child's first and only portrait. She touched it softly, closing her eyes. No matter how far she climbed, that loss remained etched into her soul. It was the one part of her life she couldn't rebuild, and the man responsible could never be forgiven. She didn't hate Chaik anymore, but she would never forget. The wounds he left weren't just emotional, they were spiritual. They had changed her forever. Sometimes, people asked her if she had moved on. She would smile and say, "I've moved forward." There was a difference. Moving on suggested forgetting, erasing, pretending it didn't matter. Moving forward meant she carried the lessons, the scars, and the strength into a new chapter. Chaik had tried reaching out several times. His messages sat unread in a separate folder. His name no longer triggered anger, but it no longer brought warmth either. He was a closed book now, a character in a past life. When her friend Uju brought up his recent downfall, Miriam simply nodded. "I hope he heals," she said, "but I can't be his medicine." The truth was, some damage could not be undone. There are cuts that even apologies cannot close. And for Miriam, losing her child had drawn a line in the sand. There was no going back to someone who watched her bleed and walked away. As she stood there watching the city lights flicker on, Miriam whispered a quiet prayer. Not for vengeance, not even for justice, but for peace. God, thank you for not letting me die in that marriage. Thank you for restoring me. She thought about the courtroom, the way Chaik looked at her as she walked in. Not with anger, not even jealousy, but with a sorrow so deep it was almost pitiful. She knew he would live the rest of his life remembering what he lost. And that was his cross to carry. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need closure. She already had everything she needed: a healed heart, a powerful name, and a future paved with light. And for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel before: peace. The grand ballroom was filled with light, chandeliers hanging like stars, the stage set in elegance, and an audience of hundreds seated in hushed reverence. Miriam stood backstage in a floor-length emerald gown, calm yet reflective. Tonight was the annual Women Who Lead Conference, and she was the keynote speaker, the final voice to close the night. Her journey had been highlighted earlier in a brief video. A woman who rose from betrayal and loss to become one of the most powerful corporate turnaround experts in the country. But no video could capture what truly burned in her soul: the years spent aching beside a man who broke her, the child she would never hold, and the nights she taught herself how to hope again. The host called her name, and the room erupted in applause. She took one final breath, stepped onto the stage, and walked into a spotlight that once seemed like a distant fantasy. As she reached the podium, she looked out over a sea of faces: young girls, aspiring women, professionals, survivors. She smiled, not with pride, but with a kind of peace that only comes from walking through fire and coming out gold. "Years ago," she began, her voice steady, "I thought love was sacrifice, that being quiet and enduring meant I was doing the right thing. But I was wrong. Real love doesn't ask you to lose yourself. It doesn't leave you bleeding while it thrives elsewhere. And healing. Healing doesn't mean going back to who you were before. It means rising into someone stronger." The audience hung on every word. Some women nodded through tears. Others clapped silently. "I lost everything I thought I needed to survive: a marriage, a home, even a child. And yet, I stand before you not as someone broken, but someone reborn. You do not need revenge to rise. Just purpose." And silence, when used wisely, is the loudest sound of all. As she stepped down from the stage to a standing ovation, cameras flashing and people wiping their eyes, Miriam felt light. Not the fleeting lightness of happiness, but the eternal weightlessness of release. Outside the venue, her Rolls-Royce awaited. The chauffeur opened the door, and she climbed in with grace. As the car pulled away, she glanced out the window and smiled at her own reflection. Not long ago, she had driven this road with pain sitting beside her. Today, she rode with peace. Somewhere across the city, Chike sat in a quiet apartment, surrounded by letters that would never be read, staring at a phone that would never ring. His empire had crumbled, and his heart had followed. But that was no longer Miriam's story. She had written her final chapter, and signed it in bold ink. As the city lights danced across her window, she whispered, "I didn't just survive, I rolled forward." And that was her greatest triumph of all. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.